First off, I just want to say shout out to my stylist because if you've been watching the previous videos, I've been doing a whole like Doc Brown frazzled hair, look like I just touched like arc lightning type hairstyle for the last month, and today I got that joint clean. Okay. So, shout out to my stylist. She definitely takes care of me. And also, shout out to Valentine's Day, the day of commercialized love. We love it. Comes around every year, reminds the single people how single they are, reminds the coupled people how expensive it can sometimes be to be coupled if you ascribe to traditional notions of how to celebrate Valentine's Day. But, I was talking with my stylist today and she asked me, like, what are you doing? I'm like, I ain't doing nothing for the day. I'm gonna have a nice cozy night in because I think. But then I was like, well, tomorrow, I'm going on a date to the symphony. And I know, we're going on a date to the symphony. How marvelous. I just like to go to the symphony anytime throughout the year, but it just so happens like Valentine's Day is a pretty good time to go see Beethoven's Fourth. And that could fall in some person's traditional approach to celebrating Valentine's Day, like a date, dinner kind of thing like that. But I also am a big fan of like non-traditional approaches to showing affection. I think tradition, as we have talked on this channel, is a double-edged sword. It can be really, really useful when there is nothing set in stone. Tradition gives you kind of like a template. It's very similar to a routine. Tradition is something that has existed and can exist and probably usually will exist for a long period of time. However, traditions can also be hindering, or they can also hinder. I don't know if that's be hindering. That sounds like a really funny ska band. But traditions can also hinder us because we might just lean so heavily into them that we don't consider alternatives to tradition. So I think it's nice to have a healthy blend of traditional and non-traditional approaches to not just Valentine's Day, but kind of life in general. And that kind of makes it more fun too, when you're not just bound to what has kind of been the quote-unquote norm for all of time, but at the same time you're not so far removed that you can't find any semblance of like normalcy within that as well. So it's a nice mix. But going back to affection, my stylist, and Valentine's Day, one of the things I talked about with my stylist today was me wanting to actually cut these locks. I've had them for 10 years, and I remember why I got them. I got them because when I was an eager student wanting to go into dentistry, as in like DDS degree, I thought it would be important for me to be presentable in my interview, and I thought being presentable meant having like a shortcut hair. At the time I had like an afro, and I cut it for the interview. It was really gut-wrenching. I still have the photos of like me going from, my cool little fro to brush cut. And then I didn't get in. So I vowed that I would never cut my hair for anybody else except for myself. And I took that a whole nother step and said, well, instead of cutting my hair, why don't I grow it? And then that became very synonymous with like my journey as an artist, because I started growing my hair right around the same time I started dabbling into arts as a profession. And 10 years later, almost, next year will be 10 years. So I'm at year 9. And as you might have gathered from listening to me rant for these periods of time, I'm changing. Okay, big time. I mean, I'm not the same person I was yesterday. I mean, I'm very close to that person, but I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. And my rationale and understanding for why I did what I did with my hair has been a point that I drove home, drove around the world, and then I came back and I was like, I think it's time for me to have a new point of reference. And as I begin to explore what it's like to come back to a shortcut hairstyle, it once again maybe has a through line to this concept of traditional and non-traditional, more so in the sense of like, how do you get new perspective? I don't know if there's really like a connecting point, but I guess that's the topic for now, is how does one get a new perspective on life? I think it's a really difficult question, but I think it first begins with observation. You have to be open to observing other forms of life. I really love the concept of perspective, both from like a metaphysical sense, but also like a physics sense, and in the way that like, this is my perspective right now, but if I turned it like this is the perspective that I am seeing when I'm talking to you all. And that's completely different than this. And what kind of world can you view when you look at me this way versus what kind of world can I see when I'm looking this way? Just that alone is baffling. And when we take perspectives of life, because all of us come from different walks of life, different paths brought us to the places that we are. We all are conditioned to view things differently. And sometimes those conditions come from the cultures that we live or thrive within. Sometimes it comes from rejecting that culture. Hey, little brown squirrel. It comes from rejecting that culture as well. Because there's a lot of people, myself included, who I would not consider myself like really deeply rooted in the general American culture, which could be a bigger question of like, what is American culture anyways? Side note, don't really know if there is such thing. But if there is, I don't know if I follow directly to it. And for most of my life, also being a queer black man in America, it's very different because I don't fit into a lot of the traditional spaces. And one space that's very interesting not to fit in and still be kind of like accepted because there's, some level of masking that might be present in my life in terms of queerness. But because, you look at me, you might not go, oh man, that guy right there. Yeah, I get that guy. But what I'm getting at is, traditional man spaces, masculine spaces where manhood is the thing. Never really been fully accepted into them. Never really been a major fan of traditional male spaces. I think those spaces are like sports bars, locker rooms, anything where there might be some sort of physical activity and a lot of grunting and yelling at each other. Or yelling at a television, because that's just a thing. And I have been extremely thankful to be able to have to be able to peer and to be able to stand in these spaces for periods of time and be embraced by some, be kind of just like allowed in and not really fully accepted into others. Because it's also given me a chance to know like what perspectives other people hold. And when I'm surrounded by men, locker room men as we'll call them, it's very different than my art studio men that I find, or my men who live out in the woods like this. And all of them have different perspectives on life, but the common through line is all of us just happen to be born with the parts between our legs that we have. And that's interesting that we are connected through that, but there's so many other differences that separate us. And yet on the entire planet, we're so similar because the human species is just one species. We can divide ourselves into race, ethnicity, class, order, all these different ways that we divide the biological kingdom. But if there were another race of super intelligent beings that happen to just pop in on Earth one day, they would look at all of us and go, human, human, human. And that's the connecting point of all of us, is that we're human beings first and foremost, and how we divide ourselves is just ways that we have chosen to divide ourselves. And tradition is sometimes that oppressive reinforcement that holds down those dividing lines that we kind of may not necessarily need as adherently as we do in today's times. Why do we need to be so divided? Why do we need to be so individualized? Why do I need to affirm so proudly that I am one of one, and I am this and I am that? I understand my perspective is unique, and I understand that every individual has a unique perspective as well. But why does it have to feel in a way that, like, it has to be me, it has to be mine, it has to be this, I have to be seen as this, and if you don't see me as that, then you're not seeing me at all? I don't know. We're a very interesting time period, because human beings may not have had the luxury to think about some of these high order social norms, because for most of the human species, it's just been about surviving like the wilds and diseases and, you know, all the things that have been able to take us down. For the first time maybe in like our species history, we're living longer than any humans have ever lived. We've got access to things that no human could even have conceived of thinking about. Even this video being posted on the internet, if you would have told somebody that this could be a thing 100 years ago, they couldn't even fathom it. They couldn't even wrap their minds around, like, you mean you're gonna carry a little box, and you're gonna talk on that box, and then you're gonna upload what you said on that box to this thing that anybody in the world can access? And yet, for people like us, that's our everyday. That's our norm. We have also now created traditions around it because it is so normal. A simple tradition is waking up every morning and checking your social media profile. Again, consistent routine activities that help us, but then, you know, you could do alternative approaches where you don't even have social media like I do right now. Ooh. This has been a very good rant. I never really have a sense of direction where I'm going with these talks. I always know where I'm going with the walks, though. That's the nice part. So I let my mind wander while my body goes on a very normal and scripted routine. And that's tradition right there. You feel me? Because here's this set path that I know that I can follow, and it's going to take me anywhere. And while I'm able to walk that path, I'm able to allow another aspect of myself to wander, to drift, to explore, to gain new perspectives as I talk whatever's in my head out into the world. I don't know. I'm just trying to make sense of things that might be senseless. And isn't that just fun and so human to do as well? Like making sense out of the senseless. There's something in the power of meaning and how we are the only things on this planet that can create a concept like meaning and attach it to something that would normally have no meaning at all. And suddenly it becomes everything. We ascribe value to it. We put purpose to it, and we create rituals and rites and activities to justify the meaning of that thing. And here we go. This is how it all comes together. That is what we've done. The perfect example is Valentine's Day. A day that would have been completely ordinary on a calendar has now become something that has such strong meanings across anybody who celebrates that day. It's just fascinating, really, that we have that ability to to put emphasis on the nothingness. And man, it's really a treat to know that you can kind of do the opposite. You can put nothingness onto the things that have meanings, thereby creating a new approach, thereby creating a new tradition. Because the non-traditional will eventually become traditional if you keep it up enough. And then there'll be a point where there'll be another form of tradition and non-tradition that comes out of that tradition, and then it just becomes a beautiful cycle where we're always just revitalizing and reviewing and revamping what has already existed. And that is how we as humans are gonna find sense of life and purpose. Oh my gosh. It's all moving, it's all changing, it's all evolving. And it's better if we practice going with that flow, because that's human nature, to change. So change it up. Yeah.